Well, I'm ready to begin. So welcome and felcha to Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and I'm your host, David McDonnell. This is Sunday, March the 7th, 2021. Don't forget, in 1 week from tonight, we're having the Random Thoughts Roman numeral 1 story swap. First annual. It's a Sunday before St. Patrick's Day. And what I want, as I've said before, I want you to send me a story. Send me a recording of the story, and I'll edit it together as a program. The story swap will not be done live. And I have a few takers so far. I have some people who tell me, anyway, they're sending me stories. But I still have time slots to fill, and I even have a surprise guest. I won't tell you who that is, because then it would not be a surprise. And a reminder on the format. What I'm going to do is devote the entire half hour next week to stories told by you, by guest tellers. I may sneak in one, depending on how much time you all leave me, but otherwise the stories will be by you. Now, if you're interested, send me an email at clandano@gmail.com or send me a Facebook message to let me know it's coming, and we can talk about format, etc. But I think it's going to be fun. If some of you send me stories, if enough of you send me stories, it will be fun. I participated in story swaps before where people just take turns telling stories, and it can be a hoot. Now, today what I was going to do is simply tell you a legend, and it's one of the legends from the Irish Finian cycle. These stories mainly are about the adventures and exploits of Finn McCool, although there are other heroes to some of these stories. And they're oral stories that have been around maybe 1,500 years. So obviously there are many, many versions of each of these stories. And Irish monks started in about the 11th century to transcribe these stories and write them down. And they continue that project off and on for several centuries. There's 3 or 4 centuries later, they were still recording transcribing some of the stories from the Finian cycle. Now, the beginning of the story takes place at Giant's Causeway. And I don't know if you've ever been there, if you've seen pictures of it. It's one of the most amazing things I have ever seen. But there's like 40,000 columns sticking up at various heights. And from a distance, they look like round cylinders. But they're actually hexagons or multi-shaped. Some of them have less than 8 sides. And scientists say that these were caused by volcanoes 50, 60 million years ago. And it pushed rocks up to the surface. And once they got above the surface, they cooled. They developed cracks. And some of them then contracted a little bit as they cooled, leaving these columns that look like, again, pillars. And that's the explanation that scientists give. And there aren't any of these, I don't believe, anywhere else in the world. And scientists have not been able to explain why, there was volcanic activity everywhere 50, 60 million years ago. And why is this the only place where you see such a thing? And there's a reason. There is a reason. The reason is scientists have it all wrong. These pillars were not created by volcanoes. It's not called the volcanic causeway. It's called the Giant's Causeway for a reason. Giant is singular, by the way. It's giant apostrophe S, not plural giants. And the giant in the name Giant's Causeway is Finn McCool. Because the causeway was built by Finn McCool and his crew. And it's the foundation for a bridge that they were building across the North Channel to connect Ireland and Scotland. He never did finish the project. Here we are in 2021, and there still is no bridge connecting Ireland and Scotland. And I'm not sure exactly why Finn McCool I did not finish the project. I'm going to have to do some research on the Finian cycles and can see if I can figure out why. Or I should say, why not. If I don't come up with an answer, maybe I'll continue the Finian cycle by me writing the rest of the story. Well, going back to the causeway, Finn and his men were working on it very hard. Obviously a very big project. And Finn was forced to spend a great deal of time away from his family, particularly his lovely wife, Una. And he decided to take a break from the project and go home and see how his wife was doing in his absence. So Finn cut down a tree. He lopped off the roots, lopped off a bunch of the branches, and he used that tree as a walking stick to go back to visit his wife, Una. And you see, I told you, Finn was a giant of a man, and he needed a tree as his walking stick. And off he went to see Una at their home on Knockmany. Now, there was another giant in the region. Some say he was from Ireland, some say he was from Scotland. But it's of no matter, because by all accounts, he was the strongest man alive. And no other man stood a chance at all against this man. And this man's name was Benadonner. And nature couldn't stand up to Benadonner either, because there was one time when the gods just sent a lightning bolt down to the earth's surface, straight to the head of Benadonner. So what did Benadonner do? He stuck up his fist, met the lightning bolt as it came down, and it crushed the lightning bolt into his hand. And he took his other hand and grabbed it and squished the lightning bolt into a pancake. And he took that pancake and put it in his pocket, carried it around for the rest of his days to show people, particularly when he wanted to scare his enemies. Benadonner gave all the great fighters of Scotland and Ireland a thorough beating. And I should say all of them except for Finn McCool. And Benadonner swore that someday, in fact, he would not rest until he could find Finn McCool and beat him, and thereby prove that he, Benadonner, was the best fighter in the Celtic world. Now, when Finn heard these rumors that Benadonner was coming for him at the causeway, looking for a fight, and that's why Finn suddenly had this urge to go home to see his wife, and why he made the walking stick. Not so much to see his wife, but to stay away from Benadonner. And that's why he went to his home at Knockmany. I think I forgot to tell you the name of this story, although you should have figured it out by now. I told you the story was a legend, and the name of the story is The Legend of Knockmany. Now, Una and Finn lived at the time at the top of Knockmany. It's a hill in what is now County Tyrone, not terribly far from the causeway, which is in County Antrim. And many people wondered why Finn built a house on the top of the hill, because it was on a plateau, the very top of this plateau, top of the hill, which meant it collected the wind from any direction. It was the coldest place, maybe the coldest place in all of Ireland, because it didn't matter which way the wind blew. It blew right across the plateau at Knockmany, so it was always, always cold. And there wasn't even water on the hill, at the top of the hill of Knockmany. Finn would always say, it's the best view, though, in all of Ulster, because he could see in all directions. He had a beautiful panoramic view. In fact, when he looked north, he could see over the valley all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And as for the water, he said, I'll build a well as soon as I finish with the causeway. Now, Una wasn't terribly happy with Finn's priorities, because she thought the water, a well, should come first, and the bridge to Scotland second. But Finn thought otherwise. Now, truth be told, Finn had another reason for building his house at the top of this plateau of Knockmany. And the view was, while it was beautiful, this panoramic view, what he liked best about it is he could look at all directions and keep a sharp eye for Benidonner. And there was no other place in Ireland for a man to look out and see an enemy coming towards him better than at the top of Knockmany. Now, Finn spent a week or so with Una, and it was a wonderful time. It was very comfortable indeed, and it got him away from the dread he had of Benidonner. And he hadn't seen his wife for quite some time, so it was a nice respite from building the causeway and worrying about Benidonner. But Una could sense, perhaps only as a wife could, that something was troubling Finn. And she needled him and prodded him, and then he finally confessed. And he said, "It's Benidonner that I'm worried about. He's coming here to challenge me, and I fear that I cannot beat him. He's flattened a thunderbolt into a pancake, and he's done that with other men. How can I beat such a man?" And then he took out his thumb and stuck it deep in his mouth. And he said, "He's coming here to challenge me now. And he'll be here tomorrow by midday. I can tell by touching my thumb." Now you see, I didn't give you that backstory, but Finn had a peculiar practice of touching his thumb deep into the back of his mouth, to the big tooth in the back of his mouth. And that's where he got his wisdom. Whenever he did that, he felt the wisdom. And he would say, "My thumb tells me that he's coming." And curious thing is that even to this day, we call that tooth deep in the mouth the wisdom tooth. And it certainly imparted some wisdom upon Finn McCool. Well, Una said, "Don't fret, my dear. Depend on me. I'll bring you out of this scrape better than you could yourself. By your rule of thumb or otherwise, I'll take care of things." And this relieved Finn a bit, because he had a great deal of confidence in his wife. And then Una went back into the house, and she grabbed a needle and thread, and she grabbed Finn's nightshirt, which was, as you might expect, a huge nightshirt, because he was a giant of a man. And then she grabbed an extra piece of fabric, and she sewed kind of an extension to the bottom of the nightshirt. So rather than going down to his knees, it went all the way down to the floor. And she also sewed a hood at the top of the nightshirt. And when she was done, it looked like a sleeper for a baby, except that it was large enough to fit a giant of a man like Finn McCool. She then kneaded some dough and made 2 loaves of bread. She used one of those softened loaves before she put it in the oven. She used one of those softened loaves to completely encase a cast iron griddle. And then she took another loaf and made it the normal way without the griddle. And she put both loaves in the oven. And then she pulled out a pot of new milk. And she made from that curds and whey. And I'm sure you know what whey is from the Little Miss Muffet fairy tales or nursery rhymes. It's just, the curds are just a coagulated milk, which looks solid like a white stone. And whey is just the liquid substance that comes out of it around the curds. And then she went outside. She grabbed a white stone about the same size as those curds that she just made. She put that white stone on the kitchen table. Now, having done that, Una sat down quite content that she did what she wanted to do. And she knew, unlike her husband, that she could handle Benadonner when he arrived. Now, sure enough, the next day, right around midday, Benadonner could be seen approaching Knockmany. And Una saw him, and she gave out a big whistle. Now, this is the way for the Irish in those days, long ago, to signal to travelers that they were welcome to come in. And this confused Finn. He says, "What are you doing, Una?" He says, "I'm shaking like a rabbit, and you're inviting in my worst enemy." And Una says, "Don't fret, Finn. Leave Benadonner to me, and you just do as I tell you." So Una pulled out the cradle that she and Finn used when they had wee ones in the house, which are now long since gone and were out on their own in elsewhere in Ireland. And she pulled out that cradle, and it was small enough for a wee one, but she told Finn to put on his sleeper and climb into the cradle. Now, Finn did as he was told. He put on his sleeper, he got into the cradle, and it was an extremely tight fit. The cradle was made for a baby. And he could barely get his torso into the crib. His shoulders and his head kind of came out the side. And his legs extended well over the end of the cradle, as did his shoulders and his arms. It was just the essence of his torso that fit inside the cradle. And Una said to him, "You must pass for your own child. So just sit there snug, don't say a word until spoken to, and then play it by ear." That was expected. Una made it up to the top of Knockmany. And he said when he got there, "Is this the home of Finn McCool?" "Indeed it is," said Una. "And won't you come to our house?" And Benadonner says, thank you very much, and you must be Mrs. McCool." She says, "That I am," she says. "And what business do you have here with my husband?" So Benadonner says, "I've heard that he is the strongest and bravest man in Ireland, but I'm here to test that. Is he home right now?" And Una said, No, he's not home right now. Someone told him that another giant of a man named Benadonner has been around the causeway looking for him. So Finn set out to meet him. Truth is, that poor giant Benadonner, I hope doesn't meet up with Finn, because if they find each other, Finn, giant of a man that he is, will squish Benadonner into a pancake. Well, says Benadonner. Says, "I'm Benadonner, and it's I who am seeking Finn McCool." And Una laughed, a very hearty laugh. He says, "Well, if you take my advice, sir, you would pray never to meet my husband. But if you must, then you can stay here until he returns." Now, in the meantime, she says to him, the wind has been really picking up from the west. And as you can see, our house, the way it is oriented, my front door is facing the west. Whenever the wind does that, Finn takes the house and spins it, turns it, such that the wind doesn't come in our front door. Since Finn is not here, would you be so kind as to move my house so that the front door faces the east instead of the west? Benadonner was a little startled by this request, but being the guest, he figured he better do as he was asked. So he went outside the house, and he grabbed one end at a corner, and he reached around and grabbed the other. And with one hand, he pushed the house, and the other hand, he pulled the house, And he kept doing that, exerting every ounce of strength he had, until the house began to shift. And then he kept at it, and it shifted some more. And eventually, after a long period of time, he had completely shifted the house so that the front door, which used to face the west, now faced the east. Now he was a bit tired by this effort, and actually kind of amazed, because it was a difficult task for him to do. And yet, Una had told him that Finn does this whenever the wind changes direction. So Finn must do this all the time. But when he finished the task, Una said to him, "Oh, thank you very, very much. I'm sure you are a kind man, and I hope you do not meet my husband, because he surely will do you harm. But while you are here in my home, could you do me but one more favor? We've had a long dry spell here at Knockmany, and are in dreadful need of water. Finn says that there's a fine spring just over yonder, and it was his intention to finish digging a well at that spot. But when he heard you were near, he stopped that project and went out looking for you. So if you could, would you mind trying to finish that well?" McDonnell again was a guest in the house, so he felt compelled to do so, and Una led him to where the well was going to be built, and where Finn had actually started the well. And McDonnell, when he saw there, it still looked like one solid rock. There wasn't much of a well there. It wasn't much of a hole. So McDonnell kind of climbed in what was the hole and found a big boulder, which he picked up and carried out. And he went back and did another, and then another, and then another, until he got to this huge boulder, which was one of the largest he had ever seen. And he grabbed as much of a grip as he could, because it was even bigger than his outstretched arms. And he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, until he finally was able to move the rock. And once he got it moving, he was able to get a better grip of it and carry it out of the hole. And what do you think was underneath that boulder? It was water. You see, McDonnell had dug and carried enough rocks out of that hole to actually find water. And thus, there now was a well at Knockmany. Now, Una said, thank you very, very much for doing this task, which my husband otherwise would have done. Please come into my house. You've done me two great favors. Even though you are the sworn enemy of my husband, I must invite you in my house to share some bread with me. So McDonnell came into the house, and he sat down at the table, and Una handed him a loaf of bread, which, as you might expect, was the loaf of bread with cast iron skillet inside of it. And she also gave him some butter and some cabbage and some boiled bacon, so he could have with his bread. Now McDonnell sat down, and he took a piece of the bread, and he took a bite, and he let out a scream, a blood-curdling scream. He said, "What is this? There are two of my teeth which just popped up from trying to take a bite out of this bread." And Una said, "Well, that's Finn's bread. It's the only bread which he eats when he's home. And I forgot to tell you that nobody can eat that bread except Finn. And Finn and our wee one who's in the cradle over there are the only two people who can eat that bread. And I thought that you, as a giant as well, and someone who is so strong, would likewise be able to eat the bread. And I didn't want to offend you by saying that only Finn could eat this bread." Now, McDonnell saw that, and heard that, and he figured, well, I'm going to take another bite of this bread. He was a little bit bothered that Finn McCool could eat this bread, and he couldn't. So he took another bite. And when he took another bite, he yelled out another scream. And he said, "Thunder, I lost another tooth. If I should eat this bread entirely, I would be left without a single tooth left in my mouth." Now with that, Finn kind of stirred in the cradle a little bit, and Una said, if you could not eat this bread, Una said, at least you could have said so quietly, for now you've wakened up the wee one. And then Finn said, Mommy, I'm hungry. So Una then brought over another loaf of bread to Finn, to the wee one in the cradle. And as you might expect, it was the other loaf of bread without the cast iron skillet inside of it. And Finn, of course, took a bite and another bite and another bite. And it wasn't long before Finn had eaten the entire loaf. Now this startled McDonnell more than a wee bit, because he thought to himself, I have no chance against a man who can eat bread like this. And even his son can eat this kind of bread. And then McDonnell said, he says, "Let me take a closer look at that lad." And he walked over to the cradle. And Una said to the lad, "Get up," pointing to Finn. He said, "Get up and show the man your strength." And Finn then handed McDonnell a white stone, the white stone from the table. And he said to McDonnell, "Can you turn this white stone into water?" McDonnell didn't think he could, but he thought he should try. So McDonnell took that white stone and he squeezed and he squeezed and he squeezed. And no matter how hard he squeezed, he could not turn that stone into water. And then the wee one, Finn, dressed as the wee one, reached over and grabbed one of the curds, which looked like a white stone. And he took that curd and he squeezed, not even that hard. And suddenly water, the whey, began dripping out of his hand. And then Finn, again, as the wee one said, "I'm going back to my cradle now. You had better be off. If my father catches you here, he will flatten you within minutes." Now, seeing what he had done, McDonnell came to the same opinion, and he said to Una, "I admit that, as strong as I am no match for Finn McCool. Tell him I will avoid him the best that I can, and I will never, ever return to Knockmany or to the Causeway." And with that said, McDonnell departed. He left Knockmany, and he never did return to the Causeway. And thus did Finn McCool, through the wit and scheming of his wife Una, succeeded overcoming by cunning, that which he never could have overcome by force. And that's the legend of Knockmany. Again, come back next week. We'll tell some more stories, maybe one by me and the rest by you. In the meantime, take a look at my website, clandonald.net. Send me an email, clandonald@gmail.com. Like and share me on Facebook. Take a look at our YouTube videos if you like. But I'm looking forward to next week. This was a story by me. Next week I want to hear stories by you. Goodbye.